Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here for this webinar. First, let me give a special thanks to Transition Accelerator for organizing this and for inviting myself and my friends and colleagues here to do this with you. So let me just start very quickly by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Montreal on the unceded Indigenous lands. The Gahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters that this beautiful city was founded on. I want to thank them for that. So let me just say these are very heady times. I think we all know that. War in Europe, unfolding alliances, isolationism, economic radicalism south of the border, longstanding friendships and partnerships being called into question, and of course within Canada, a very fast-changing political scene. Caught in the fold of all that, of course, is energy. And on the one hand, the energy transition I'd say has moved into a sort of second gear over the past few years. We've got electric vehicles that have become a lot more the norm than certainly they were a few years ago. I think if you go back 5 or 6 years, they were maybe 1 out of 100 sales. Right now, where I am, there's something like 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 new sales are EVs. Heat pumps are flying off the shelves. Wind and solar are by and large the cheapest resources when it comes to producing kilowatt hours. Batteries are increasingly competitive for offering capacity. We may be at the outset of a nuclear renaissance, a second one. Demand forecasts are growing extraordinarily quickly. We're looking at forecasts now that, first of all, are completely outdated, only 2 years back, and second of all, are moving into areas that we haven't seen in about a half a century. There's not enough power to go around. I work with clients across the country, governments in particular, and utilities that do not have enough power to accommodate all the requests, whether that's for the needs of AI, whether it's for the needs of a manufacturing renaissance in the West, whether it's for the needs of electrification of vehicles, of heating, and of industry. So a lot going on in the background of all these geopolitical changes. On the other hand, so the transition is definitely moving forward. On the other hand, we see a number of other really important changes. Climate fatigue, for one. Concerns about affordability, for another, after years of very high inflation. Utility concerns for reliability, given all the pressures on the system. And then broader societal and political concerns around energy security. So all these are in the backdrop. One thing is for sure, we are in the transition. A transition of this magnitude is not a transition of one administration or one political cycle. I personally have no doubt at all that we will look back to this time in, say, a generation or so as a very, very different place, in the same way or very similar way that we look back now to pictures of old horse-drawn buggies or filament lamps burning whale oil, or we were just talking before this started about folks shoveling coal into home furnaces. Those are things that seemed like absolute certainties at the time, things that would not go away, and a generation later, they were old news. We're in the midst of a transition. It's hard to see. It's hard to see it when you're in it, but I have no doubt that we're in it and that we will be on the other side within roughly a generation or so. Who knows if it'll be 2050 or 40 or 60, but roughly a generation. So the question from my perspective here is not one of if, but principally of how. There's also a when question, but principally the how. How do we build fast enough to both meet and enable electricity demand? How do we overcome our conventions and traditions and processes and red tape that were primarily designed for a different era? How do we attract the capital and the labor that's needed to make it all happen? And how do we do it all in ways that are affordable for Canadian households and that will be competitive for our businesses, including our export-facing industries? So these are really big challenges. That's what we're all working on. Again, my perspective, the transition is definitely on. Really critical for Canada to emerge on the other side of it as leaders, not as followers, as having chosen our path in the transition, not having it imposed on us. Fundamentally, we get this right, or we may not get it at all. And so getting it right is really the theme of this conversation. I'm joined today by three people I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. So I'll just introduce them very, very briefly here. So Tim Eckel, Tim, who was a member of the Electricity Council that I had the honor of chairing last year. Tim, who was previously Vice President of Energy Transition and of Asset Management at Sask Power. I've rarely known anyone with 2 feet so solidly on the ground and at the same time a head and a brain able to think big and outside the box. That's Tim. You're going to hear from him shortly. Julia McNally, Julia, who I knew from her days at IESO, who is now the Director of Climate Action at Toronto Hydro, one of the largest utilities, of course, in Ontario. And Julia, who is a veteran of these issues and has been working on especially the demand side of the equation for as long as I've known her. And then Mo Kabara, of course, Mo is the Executive Vice President of Transition Accelerator, former colleague of mine as well. I've had the pleasure of working with him for many years now. And Mo is going to kick this off with a brief presentation about an affordability analysis that his team initially did for the council that I chaired last year. That's really looks at what does affordability mean? What does the transition mean for household energy affordability? And brings it all into the kind of overarching package of what he calls the energy wallet. We're going to start with that very brief presentation, and then we're going to move into a conversation with Tim and Julia, who bring obviously utility perspectives, but really importantly, perspectives that we're going to explore both from the asset side of the equation and from the customer side of the equation. So with that, let me pass it over to Mo.
Thank you, Philippe. Really appreciate everyone being here on this call and being joined by Philippe and Tim and Julia. So I'm just gonna be quick here, but I want to really present some of the work that we've done on this topic in terms of energy affordability. And we'll put in a link for the report if you want to dive deeper into this on your own time. But I'll kind of try to keep it short in terms of communicating some of the key insights that we were able to do as part of this analysis. So the term here that I'm going to use is called what we're calling energy wallet. And the idea here is that really this is what, the way that people interface with, or household interface with energy costs. And it's basically tracking the costs associated with purchasing, operating, and maintaining energy technologies for household needs. So that's looking at household energy, powering, heating and other equipments in the house, but also personal transportation, so vehicles. And essentially, when we look at that, we look at sort of what does the energy wallet look like today. And the analysis, what we wanted to do is look at how does that energy wallet change into the future, expecting that we're going to essentially ask folks, as Philippe mentioned, to switch over to different types of equipment, so our HVAC systems and domestic heating system, water heating systems, and transportation is electrifying, over the years. And then also, as we're building out the grid and building out the electricity system that is going to support that increasing demand, there's going to be also changes to the cost of electricity. And when we couple those together, essentially wanting to understand how does that change what people pay for energy today versus what they're likely to pay in the future. So the kind of key insights that we were able to conclude as part of this work is that, on average, when we look at the median percent change in energy wallets between today and 2050, even when we project out what electricity costs are likely to be, we see that low, medium, high here, this is based on electricity cost projections. So under the low scenario, electricity increases, 1% above the rate of inflation. Under the high scenario, it's a couple percentages, 2.3% above the rate of inflation. And what we see here is that, with that spread, essentially, it's a pretty good news story, right? So despite that there's increasing rates, electrification can actually improve energy affordability. In the case of most Canadian households under even our highest rate trajectories. And we'll get into the details in terms of how does that break down a little bit more in terms of the proportion of the population. So we ask ourselves, why is that the case? Why do we see energy wallets improving despite rates going up? I won't get into too much detail here, other than just to give you an example related to electric vehicles, which is kind of one of the key drivers that's going to be that is responsible for the energy wallet savings. So essentially, what we're seeing here is that the efficiency of electricity is the key driver here. So that's both heat pumps, as Philippe mentioned earlier, we're getting a lot of adoption of those, and electric vehicles. And essentially what it is that both of these technologies are going to use less energy to provide the same function, right, as the current fossil fuel systems do. So you'll see some numbers here, and you see gigajoules, and you see energy, and might not mean anything to you. So I kind of wanted to translate this to something that is more relatable to everybody, that actually drives a car. So when you go to the pump, essentially what we're saying under that medium scenario, you'll see that it's going to cost you 80 cents a liter. That's even in 2050, if we look at the increased cost of electricity, to basically drive as much as you would have driven with a liter of gasoline. Today, depending on the day and depending on the gas station that you're stopping at, we're seeing gasoline prices, being, 160, 170, 180, depending on where you're at in the country as well. So the idea here is that that efficiency translates to reduce operational costs, even if electricity costs increase over the next 25 years to basically support the build out of that grid and the build out of of this electricity system from a generation, transmission, and distribution side. And essentially, like when we look at the different rates of electricity, there might be 60 cents per liter, it might be 90 or 100 cents, but you'll see there that there's a big spread. There's a big difference between, it's half the amount of money that is going to be required to drive the same kilometer, which is, inherently that is the efficiency that is driving that energy, those energy savings. So then when we look at who's actually saving, right, we see that under our scenarios, even under the highest scenario, there's still a majority of the population, more than around 52%, so it's kind of split, that is going to pay less. But what we see here is that proportion that will pay more, it's most likely people that don't actually drive or they don't drive as much, which basically don't have the savings from that energy wallet bucket that is coming out of the transportation piece. Like you saw, you're saving half the amount of on per liter, so that's not there to capture those savings. Or ones that are living in jurisdictions that have pretty low natural gas rates and also high projected rates. So there's a difference in terms of the type of archetypes that will see those savings. And also when we look at across the country, we see that a lot of jurisdictions will see lower energy wallet costs, specifically in Atlantic Canada. Some may see slightly higher, but we're not seeing a huge difference from what is currently happening. So there's a good news story here, but I want to caveat that news story with that we're not really going to stumble upon this future by accident, or this is not a fait accompli, so we really need to make sure that we're capturing those economies of scale. So that means that as we kind of develop more adoption for these technologies, EV prices go down. Right now, an EV has, an incremental cost when you purchase the vehicle. Our assumption is that costs is going to keep going down as we manufacture and produce more batteries, and we drive the cost of production down so that they're at cost parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. So we need to make sure that we are actually obtaining those economies of scale that we're forecasting, and we need to make sure that we're building smart and effectively in terms of how we're deploying technologies, and learn to make sure that we're able to grow the system, the electricity system, in a way that is not going to be exceeding those cost projections by much more than what we're seeing, and making sure that things like delays, cost overruns are kept to a minimum. And so that's kind of really opens it up well for the rest of the conversation, which is this is not doom and gloom, but also it's not all roses. We need to make sure that we're kind of shepherding this transition in a way that makes sure that we're getting the good news, or they're getting the good benefits here, which is going to help get people out of energy poverty and increase energy affordability. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Philippe, to hopefully dive into this more in terms of how do we actually build smart and effectively.
All right, thanks so much, Mo. That's really helpful. It's a great way to kick us off here. And I will segue off that very last point that you made that I think is absolutely critical to this, right? Need to build smart and effectively. And actually, it's funny when you say that, it kind of rolls off the tongue, and you think about the smart and effectively, which is really critical here. I also want to emphasize need to build, right? We're gonna need to build. So we need to build. We need to do it smartly, and there are bad ways and expensive ways and time-consuming ways, and then there are better ways, and that's really one of the big challenges that you're laying out here. So with that, let me bring Tim and Julia into the conversation here. Tim, I'm going to start with you. As you know, when we talk about electricity, we tend to talk in terms of generation, right? We all have our favorites, and I'm always amazed that generation seems to fall on ideological lines. If you're on the left, you want wind and solar, and if you're on the right, you want nuclear and hydrogen, and I find that fascinating. I'm not going to get into that rabbit hole. What I do want to get to is set aside generation for a second, right? Because we all talk about that. What do we need to do? What do we need to know about how to deliver that power, irrespective of how it's produced? What do we need to be doing in terms of delivering power smartly and effectively, and building the infrastructure in that way?
1 second. Okay. Thanks, Phil. Yes, how do we deliver? And like you said, the generation's been getting the focus, and I've always said that in the energy transition, generation might be 75% of the cost, but it's 25% of the effort. The delivery side is 25% of the cost and 75% of the effort. And that's because, linear assets are hard to build. The number of points and devices we're going to have to interact with and integrate is going to be enormous. And also, ancillary services that used to be inherently provided by large rotating machines are now going to have to be done by the delivery service. So this is going to really change things, and we have to get our heads around that. The one good thing about the delivery system is we're at a point where across the country we have aging assets. We have to replace them. And now is the time to actually upgrade, make them smart, do all this stuff. There'll be a small premium, but it's a lot less costly than having to go back and replace them later. Like for like shouldn't be occurring. We should be thinking about climate hardening, making them smart, and upgrading for the future load. There we go. So okay.
Yeah, no, that's so this is really important, right? And I'm not sure that it's always fully understood the extent to which what you're talking about here is not, because we tend to think of this simplistically as, okay, we're talking about changing the power gen side, and then we'll need to string up some more wires. But you're talking about actually stringing them up differently, and not just string them up, but also hardening what exists. Can you get into that a little bit further? Talk about what hardening means here.
Hardening, well, our climate's changing, so we have to be thinking about different ice loading. The strain we put on poles. Do we put it underground as opposed to overhead? We got wildfires happening, so maybe we have to step back and say, should this area be placed underground or rerouted? Do we need redundancy? Those types of things. And how do we make the thing stronger? We got to look at flood mapping. We haven't done that for years. Lots of areas now being, floods are occurring that we never thought would happen. We've got to make sure that we're ready for those types of things. So that's the kind of hardening I think that we have to get into. The challenges I think with building all this out is historically, from a regulator and a utility, we're always trying to keep the rates low. We just want to build the minimum required today. Don't want to overbuild anything, have underutilized assets. And I think that with the load growth we're projecting, the risk of an underutilized asset is really low. We have to get by that. That's not going to happen in the future. There might be the odd location remote where we start thinking about microgrids, but for the most part, if the load isn't there this year, it'll likely be there next year. So we got to just get to that point and accept that. The other thing would be is when we're talking about smart, we have to start putting out sensors and smart devices out there. And some of the foundational systems that we, always have to write business cases for, like, automated metering infrastructure, centralized distribution control, operators and centers, advanced distribution management systems. Those aren't business cases anymore. They're requirements to operate the system. You need them to actually make the system work, because we're going to get into having to balance and control loads at a large scale. It's not like where you control one large transmission load. This is going to be the mass market. We're going to need those systems, and we have to get them in place now so that we can move our people and our systems from monitoring to controlling to automation. You can't just jump into automation because it'll be chaos. You have to understand how the system works before you can start to automate it. So those are some of the things that we have to start to do.
So smart as a baseline, not as a
baseline.
bonus add-on to investments.
Yeah, and once you get the foundations in place, the other benefits will come. But you need those in place to make things work. You got to know what the customer load is. You got to know what your system's doing when you move loads around. What happens? You have to understand that. So that all part and parcel. The other thing is too, like you mentioned, a lot of utilities are having to deny loads. We got to get ahead of the wave. The load's going to grow. We got to get ahead of that. The risk of being late, from a economic perspective is great, but also reputational. You don't want to be that area. And also, if you can't handle the loads, then you also have reliability issues, because there's no other redundancy. If you can't, under steady state conditions, serve the load, well, under a contingency, you're going to be in trouble. So we have to be thinking that way as well. And as more people electrify things, requirements for reliability need to go up. They can't be maintained. People are going to expect, if they can't drive, if they can't do things, they're not going to be accepting that. So those are some of the things that have to be thought about on the distribution side. The transmission, there's a whole bunch of other things to think about.
So Tim, I'm going to come back with Julia to talk a little bit about the I'm going to use my term, anticipatory investments, right? Which, essentially what you're saying is we need to see that the load growth is going to be there, and we need to build ahead of demand. I think when we spoke about it earlier, you talked about ditching the fear. And so we're gonna circle back on that. Just before we do, I want to ask you one question, because I know that you, again, coming back to your 2 feet solidly on the ground, we've had many conversations about the labor and supply chain side of this. It's one thing to say that we're going to need to invest and put capital in the ground and string up wires hard and smart. What about the labor side? What does the challenge look like now, and what do we need to do differently?
Well, it's a challenge now. I think a lot of utilities are even struggling to spend their budgets just to get things in place. And there'll never be a cheaper time to build them now, in my view. So I think we have to keep that in mind. So if you can construct something
Why
now,
is that?
well, costs are going up. And as everybody starts chasing the same resources, which are going to be limited, the prices will just escalate. So, even when you talk about electrification, there's a big draw of electricians that go into, households, but you also need those same people on the utility side doing activity. So the demand for certain skill sets is going to really grow high. And there's going to be new skill sets that are going to be needed as well that we need to be thinking about. If you're going to move all the ancillary services to the delivery system, that's a whole new skill set that doesn't exist today. So we have to get that in place. There is a I would say, a shortage in the country today. And I think we have to start, taking a national view of this, because resources move province to province. We got to make that easier. And I think that's going to happen with the environment we're in today. All types of trades can move to different provinces and work. That's a great thing. But we're going to need that. We're going to have to put a real focus on training people, recruiting young people into these trades. They're great paying. We have to get them into that area. And then I think the supply chain as well. A lot of it's been, other countries. We might have to look at how do we bring some of that back to Canada ourselves. And even some of the historical things that were done with, the anti-dumping tariffs, those kind of things. I think we have to step back and review those. There was some done with transformers from Asian countries.
Now's the time to be talking about tariffs.
Tariffs, yeah. But you have to review whether or not those are still valid things. If we can't get them internally in the country or from North America, should we really be putting tariffs on countries that will give them to us in a shorter time frame for a lower cost? Comes down to affordability and reliability. So I think there's a whole area there that needs to be looked at too.
Thanks, Tim. Let me just share a little perspective on my end. So I mentioned before, I'm in Montreal. I often work closely with Hydro-Québec. They're not part of this webinar, but many of you may know, Hydro-Québec has a $170 billion capital plan right now, and that involves building out the gen side and the T&D side, including 5,000 kilometers of wires. To your point, right? We need the wires. I remember speaking with Michael Sabia, the CEO of Hydro-Québec, about that, and asking him, what's your biggest concern here? Is it capital attraction? We're going to get the 170 billion of capital investment. Is it something else? And his number one concern was labor. So really, to your point, we need to take a very different approach on labor and much more of a coordinated approach for large public infrastructure projects. I think that's going to be essential. All right, so we need to build a lot. We need to build quickly. We need to build with smartly, effectively, in a coordinated fashion to make sure that we have the labor and revisit our supply chain issues, including tariffs. That's great. Let me bring it over to Julia, because Julia, you're Toronto Hydro, and Toronto Hydro has been doing a lot of this work now, especially looking at the build out side of transmission. And also I just want a little plug, and we didn't talk about this, but you guys have been working on the build out side. Also, you've been working on the smart side of that. And in particular, the integration of the demand and supply. So really making this more of a dynamic market and more of a two-way flow, including with some of the mapping that you guys just put out that I'll tell you, my team has been looking at with great joy, I will say. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what Toronto Hydro is doing in this regard to get more wires and to get the whole system smarter.
Yeah, absolutely, Philip. And we're all really excited about the new map. We started work on it about 1.5 years ago, so super fun. Let me start by saying Toronto Hydro is ready now for electrification. We've spent decades investing in our system. We're ready to go. That doesn't mean if the entire city electrified tomorrow that we could manage it, but it's not going to happen. We're ready for what is happening now. We've got a new team, the climate action team. We're supporting customers. So we're ready now. Again, that doesn't mean it's free to connect. It's not about plugging in, but we have the capacity in the system. We have the know-how. We have the commitment. So ready now. And we just, in November 2024, our 5-year investment plan for 2025 to 2029 was approved by the Ontario Energy Board. We're one of the first, maybe the first LDC to have gone forward with an energy transition investment plan. So we have investments for expanding our grid, making it smarter, as well as sustaining what we have. And really, Tim talked about adaptation. Absolutely, that's baked into our plan. Our plan expects growth. We see growth out this decade. We interrogated our assumptions. So we did a future energy scenarios project looking at different pathways. And almost all the pathways we saw have pretty much the same trajectory this decade. So we feel pretty comfortable that we're anticipating for the next 5 years. So we've got money for growth. We also have money, Philippe, as you just said, for smarts. So we're planning investments in reclosers, sensors, switches, to build more flexibility and adaptability into the system, more intelligence. As you alluded to, we've also got a demand response program that we've been running for a few years so we can leverage the demand side to keep optimize our system, keep costs down. We're expanding that over the next 5 years. We're also looking to experiment with different uses of batteries. One of our projects is what we call renewable enhancing battery energy storage, which is an approach to allow more solar on our system. So, I think all the issues that Tim was flagging, we agree, and we're on it. We're going down that road. Are we perfect? No, but we are going in the right direction and we have the right plan. So it's pretty exciting to be here right now.
So, Julie, could I ask you, one of the great challenges that I think every utility now, Canada, US, both sides have is getting these asks through the regulatory process, right? Because we have a regulatory process that is not designed to be super fast because it was designed for an era of extraordinarily, low, nearly flat growth, right? And what we're talking about here is, again, coming back to this anticipatory investments. So not waiting for certainty around demand, but actually building things out in advance. Can you talk a little bit about how the process went with Toronto, how easy or not easy it was to get those approvals?
I don't want to go too far. I wasn't in the midst of the regulatory team, but I can tell you, we went through the process methodically and steadily, and it was backed up by a ton of really fantastic prep work. So the key here, I think, was we went in with a strong case. We were able to explain it. And so that, we were one of the first. I think the important message for other utilities is we made it through. We got approved. So it's possible. And I think each time a utility does this, we're going to get better and better. And there's an opportunity. We've got time. I mean, the reality is the transition has started. Its pace is moderately slow right now. So we have time still. We can't tarry, but I think we've got time to learn and get better. We have to keep the right conversations going.
That's great. And I do know that your former CEO was very, very committed to this, again, to this notion of anticipatory investments. And I think made it a priority within the organization to, as you said, to get that case made, to build up that case well in advance, right? Knowing that this is going to be a bit of a groundbreaking thing. It's not completely groundbreaking. This has been done in the past, but it certainly is not in the recent culture. So that was done. I'll also mention, I knew now the recently former chair of the Ontario Energy Board, Susanna Zager, and she used to say, I'm going to misquote her here, but something to the effect of, regulators are in the business of protecting consumers from risk, not from progress. And I think that's the kind of mindset that probably enabled a regulatory review of the sort of plan that you guys put forward, and it actually made it possible. So really glad to see that happening in Ontario. Can you say a couple of words really briefly about the mapping? Because I do think that's recently out, and probably worth people understanding what that is and why you're putting it out there.
Absolutely. And I will say we started working on maps 1.5 to 2 years ago. Both load capacity maps, so maps that would tell customers if you want to if you've got a portfolio of buildings and you want to electrify, where are the spots in the city that have the easiest capacity to access, the cheapest capacity. We will serve anybody who wants to electrify anywhere, anytime. So the map is not to say you can't do it here. It's to say, here's where it may be fastest. So that's the load capacity. We also started talking about hosting capacity maps. So those are maps that tell you where you can put generation on the grid. They are two separate maps. So we got going on it, as I said, about 2 years ago. And while we were working, the OEB then issued a directive saying, all LDCs in Ontario, we want you to post load capacity maps. And again, really important for our customers to give them some just basic preliminary information to get them into the door. So we posted our load capacity map last week. Go check it out. It's pretty fun. I will just say again, if you are in a red zone, it does not mean that you cannot install EV chargers or electrify your building. It just means there may be more cost involved in making the connection. We will connect anybody who wants to be connected. Our next phase is the hosting capacity. And right now we have a list of feeders that don't have hosting capacity. Over the next couple of months, we expect to have an easy to use lookup tool. Just put in your postal code and you'll be able to find out whether your postal code has hosting capacity. And eventually it'll be a map. We're actually working with CanMet Energy right now to really develop a more sophisticated methodology for predicting hosting capacity. So lots of really cool stuff. And why we're doing that is so we can help our customers electrify.
Thanks, Julia. I do think I'm really pointing to this because I think it's a really important, it's a small tool, but it's an important tool in terms of opening up the system, right? This is fundamentally, it's about transparency, transparency, not just to customers, but to the market as a whole. And as you offer that transparency, you enable much more of an interaction with the customer base and with the market to make sure that we're plugging the holes as quickly as we possibly can, and that load and or demand and supply are really adjusting dynamically to meet up. So I think that's a really good progress there. And I noticed that that for those of you who are interested, Mo just helpfully put up the link to Toronto Hydro's map in the webinar chat. So, all right, let's now take that as a little segue, because we're talking about investments on the supply side. Let's take that as a segue to talk about the demand side, right? I used to say that, the demand side it's like the lost cousin, the neglected child of energy. We spend so much time, much as we spend so much time talking about gen and not T&D, we spend so much time talking about supply and not demand. Let's turn to the demand side here. Mo talked a lot about EVs and about heat pumps and the efficiencies that they generate and how that enables affordability here. We all know that there are also huge opportunities for demand management, for active demand management, using thermostats, using water heaters, using other appliances that are in pretty much every home and business. I'm going to say you, Julia, and you, Toronto Hydro, more broadly, you're notoriously close to your customers. What are you seeing in terms of not just your ability to tap into those appliances and into those opportunities, but also your customers' view of them and your customers' interest in I'll say participating in this exchange?
And great question. And Philippe, I'm going to divide it into two pieces: a decarbonization piece and how we engage our customers in decarbonization and electrification, which is slightly different than the question of how do we engage the customers in energy efficiency and demand response. So in activities that support the optimal use of our electricity system. And they're overlapping, but there's separate circles. So a lot of the work that we're now doing with our customers is helping them electrify heat, hot water, and transportation, because in Toronto, that's where the emissions are. So if we want to address emissions, we need our customers to make those 2 or 3 capital investments to stop combusting fossil fuels in their buildings and in their vehicles. So that's a really big focus for us, because if you want to get emissions down, when you gotta fuel switch. What we're finding when we talk to our customers is, especially residential customers, they may care deeply about climate change, but people don't really get it. They don't understand it. They don't realize that it's the natural gas is causing, the fossil fuel combustion is causing. And we're also finding, especially now, that people are super focused on affordability, on family welfare. So going out to speak to them about emissions is really not resonating. We're at the Home Show this week. We got a booth. If you're in Toronto, go to the Home Show, come visit our booth. We're there with the City of Toronto. What we're talking to our customers about is really the stuff that Mo was talking about. We're talking about how great electric technology is. We're talking about its benefits, its potential savings. You know, I mean, like EVs, I got an EV last year. It's the most fun car I've ever driven. The torque is unbelievable, the speed, the performance, like I'll never go back. And it's not because of the emissions, it's because it's just a great piece of technology. Ditto about heat pumps. I got a heat pump. My air is much less dry in the winter. Like there's just benefits to these technologies. So that's how we're pushing them. We're not.
That's a really, yeah, that's a really important point. I was talking with a pollster the other day, who was sharing with me that, you know, their latest internal polling. And I remember a few years ago, climate change was either number 1 or number 2 on Canadians' list of priorities. Now it's number 7 or number 8. And you know, quite frankly, if I ask anyone or anyone asks me off the top of my head what my priorities are, I'm not even sure I get to 7 and 8 ideas. So really important to keep that in mind. Climate is not a driving force, or at least it certainly is not top of mind for many consumers now, and is probably not going to be driving their decisions to a large degree.
Yeah.
So you focus on the others.
So we're focusing on the other. But so that's one piece. The other piece that you were talking about, the T-stats, the water heater, those are all questions about how we can leverage the demand side for a more cost-effective optimal electricity system. Absolutely important. Ontario has been doing this now steadily for over 20 years, investing in energy efficiency, investing in demand response, super important. You know, and as we've been focused, of course, in Ontario, because we've had a summer peak, we focused on demand response with air conditioning, because that's coincident with our summer peak. But as we start to shift our peak to winter, there will be an opportunity around hot water. And we have done hot water demand response before. We know how to do it. So there's definitely opportunities there. The demand response is stuff that no customer wants to do on their own, right? This is a grid service, but we know that customers will step up with the right payment, with the right opportunity. And in Toronto Hydro, we're using demand response to manage local congestion. And as I said earlier, we're going to grow that program. So we are absolutely attuned, as is all of Ontario, to leveraging a demand response. We also, I saw a question come through about energy management systems. We also know that many customers, you know, want to manage their energy costs, and so are interested in various energy management tools. I will say, if you are interested in emissions, don't worry about energy management tools. I'll give you a much easier heuristic. If you have a pipe that brings in natural gas into your home, you're emitting, and the solution is to fuel switch. You don't need a sophisticated energy management tool to manage your emissions. You just need to develop a capital plan to know when, kind of how old is your furnace, how old is your car, and develop your plan to replace it when it dies.
So, Julie, I'm going to ask you one last question on the demand side, and then I'm going to close it up and open to questions. But on the demand side, you know, I've been working in this stuff on the demand side for God knows a few decades, and to a large degree, we've been in the role of trying to, I will say, cajole people into choosing technologies that they wouldn't otherwise choose, and it's been a very voluntary approach. And, you know, depending on the technology, you might get 10 or 20 or 30 or 40% participation. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing now in terms of levels of participation on the voluntary side? And what's your thinking around voluntary versus regulatory approaches?
Philippe, is such a great place to go. So we have been for decades doing, and I'm going to quote Philippe Dunsky, help and hope. And all of the evidence, all of the academic work, the evaluations tell us that's not going to get us to the finish line. And the reason is kind of simple, right? The problem is that we have an externality that's not internalized, which is to say, we allow ourselves to pollute for free. The pollution is greenhouse gases coming out of the combustion of fossil fuels. The other problem is that fossil fuels are fantastic. And our entire global economy is built upon the combustion of cheap, energy-rich fossil fuels. So you aren't going to change that at scale unless we internalize that externality, unless we all start paying for the pollution. And you can't do that on a voluntary basis. If we want to solve this problem, we need mandatory economy-wide policies that put a price on carbon. That doesn't mean we need a carbon tax. We will not have a carbon tax. There are many tools you can use to internalize the externality. But if we are going to succeed and do this at scale and not rely entirely on direct air capture, we need policy that does it. Now, help and hope is great, right? Market transformation. We can use help and hope to create political space so that governments can regulate. So there is a good market transformation S-curve. We need to leverage it, but we need to make sure the S-curve, the regulatory part comes in.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna close this conversation here now and open it up for questions. Just before I do, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, we managed to weave in conversations about both tariffs and indirectly now carbon taxes into this conversation. No big surprise there. I'll just say, you know, from a wrap-up perspective, I think one thing that we're trying to do here is broaden the conversation, right, and get into a bit of the nuances and the complexities that too often we kind of skip over. So I'm really glad that we had a chance to talk, even if it's just at the surface level, about the importance of the transmission and distribution side, not just generation, about anticipatory investments, not just waiting to have certainty around, about the challenges of labor and supply chain and really needing to get at those. We didn't really talk much about permitting, but I think we all know that we really need to get at the permitting side of the equation as well. So, and then of course the demand side and the importance of enabling customers to make some of these changes and enabling utilities to be able to manage demand through those customer appliances. So a few snippets that I wanted to highlight, obviously just touching the surface here, but I would definitely encourage everyone to explore those further. That said, let me look over to Sarah. Sarah, have we got questions? Okay, fantastic. So Tom Pierre is asking, this is a question from Mo. Mo, what were your assumptions on gas costs by 2050 in the energy wallet analysis? And he's particularly pointing out that there are a lot of projections that show the cost of gasoline going down with the transition as demand goes down as well. Was that taken into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer kind of 2-in-1 questions here. We didn't really model out what gas or gasoline and natural gas prices will be by 2050. We basically looked at what are people paying today and looked at an electrified future and compared those two together relatively to today. So there's another question about sort of what happens between 2024 or 2025 and 2050. And this is another area that we're exploring further, which is looking at the sort of middle, right? And what happens there in terms of the interim years. That's a really good question as well, because, you know, as we said, the destination is good, but how do we make sure that the journey to get there is not going to leave some people behind? It's not going to be, you know, increasing energy wallet costs before decreasing them. And that's really what about managing the process there. So maybe just those are two questions in one.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, that leaves us a bit more time to get to other questions. Thanks, Mo. So I have next question from Christine Rhodes, who's asking about, in the context of the tariffs and energy headlines today, and I'm not even sure what the latest is today versus yesterday, but in the context of the ever-shifting tariff discussion, what are your thoughts about the future of Canada-U.S. grid integration? And Tim, I'm gonna pull you in here. I have a feeling that you have a few things to say about this. In particular, in what scenarios does it continue to be beneficial to be exporting electric energy? Is it better to be thinking in terms of national integration? So in other words, east-west.
Yeah, Philip, I think there'll still be benefits to having the U.S.-Canada integrated grid. We're well integrated today for a number of reasons: reliability, energy transfers. But as the load grows in Canada, a lot of that export energy will be used up. I think we're starting to see that in, BC, Manitoba, Quebec, even where with the demand, they're starting to direct some of that to their domestic loads. So that'll continue to happen, but we'll still have the ties to the US. There is benefits if you think of seasonal. Canada will be winter peaking, US summer. There's different capacity available that we could, utilize together back and forth. Think about solar. We have long days in summer in Canada, pushing solar south into the US when they have their system peak. Those types of things will exist, but there is a huge benefit of going east-west. I'd say regional. Maybe not every province connects east-west, but regionally. So Western Canada, Atlantic, those types of things. I think provinces have to get over being self-sufficient. That's probably the most expensive, least reliable, and highest risk approach to take now. You have to start relying on your partners, your neighbors, because we're probably not going to be able to build fast enough to meet, and we're going to have to rely on each other. We have to take advantage of time zones, geography. And then I think with some of the climate events we're having, these heat domes or wildfires, those types of things, you need to rely on your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor sometimes just to get through, to make things keep working. And I think too, with uncertainty around droughts, what impact that'll have on the hydros, that's unclear. And then I think just even to take advantage of the the solar and wind in certain parts of the country, offshore, onshore, there's great benefits there. And I think once we get, especially with vertically integrated utilities, get past the thought that we have to deliver in order to make any revenue. There is revenue in just delivering, and that maybe you just open the market to the generation and utilities do those kind of things. So huge benefit of going. Yeah.
No, sorry, finish your thought.
No, huge benefit going east-west, but there's still benefit of maintaining your US ties, even if there's tariffs and things like that. So.
Mm-hmm. So it's an and, not an or here. And just to add to that, and Tim and I have had this conversation a lot over the past year. Best example that I've certainly discussed with Tim actually is in the West. You've got a situation in the West where you got BC Hydro that has great reservoirs, hydro reservoirs, and you have Alberta and Saskatchewan, who, if they're to get off of fossil power generation, they're really looking at intermittent renewables. On the other hand, you've got wind capacity that is twice as strong. You've got winds that are twice as strong in Alberta and Saskatchewan as you do in BC. So currently, you got BC putting out RFPs and locking in wind resources within the province that are probably going to cost about nearly double what they would cost in Alberta. And then you have Alberta, who's unable to build out more wind resources because they don't have the capacity to absorb them. So real opportunity there for interprovincial trade that would just improve affordability for everyone and make this whole thing go faster. So thank you for that question. Really important one. I'm just looking down the list. There's a question, Tim, I'm going to keep you on here. It's a pretty broad question, so take it however you want. But can you comment about the unique challenges facing Western provinces, in particular Alberta and Saskatchewan? And I'll just point out, for those of you who didn't notice it, when Mo was presenting the affordability analysis, the energy wallet analysis, essentially his conclusion was, look, this is going to be overall a benefit on average in terms of affordability. So the transition will be more affordable than the status quo on average for consumers in every single province across the country, with two exceptions, Alberta and Saskatchewan. Tim, can you talk about the challenges facing the West?
Sure. Well, right now, they're some of the high cost energy producers, the rates in between two low cost, BC and Manitoba. Majority of generation fossil fuel, have to get off fossil fuel and switch between the two provinces. They're on two different grids, so any interties have to go through converter stations. Cold winters, so heat pumps at the real low levels. We just had 2 weeks in early February, probably -30, -35 degrees in Saskatchewan. So you still have to supplement it somehow, and low cost natural gas. So it's a challenge to get off anything, and as well just the like I'll speak for Saskatchewan, the amount of infrastructure and the distance between communities for driving is significant. So to build out a charging infrastructure for 1.2 million people, is a real challenge. So that's some of the challenges we see there. It's doable. The runway might take a little bit longer, but it's doable, and we just gotta do it thoughtfully and not try to, like I mentioned before, try to be self-sufficient, because that'll be a costly, unreliable way to do it.
All right. Thanks, Tim. There are a lot more questions, not a lot more time, unfortunately. I will say in particular, there are some really important questions around financing and general recognition that a lot of what we're talking about here, overall affordability can be maintained and even improved, but we're talking about moving from operating expenses to capital expenses, and that probably requires us to do some real good thinking about making capital more available, more affordable, and easier to access, especially for lower and moderate income households. That's my little clip answer to some of the questions in the chat. I want to stop it here just to respect everyone's time. It's 1 o'clock on the nose. Again, want to thank my fellow panelists here for bringing their wisdom and experience and passion to the table. Thank Transition Accelerator for organizing this whole thing. And thank the roughly 200 people who stayed with us until the very, very tail end of this discussion. So wish you all a wonderful day.